this is the Beatitudes as an examination of conscience. In the Summa Theologica, St. Thomas sees the Beatitudes as being, among other things, an exemplar and instantiation of the progress in spiritual life. So we start with the purgative state, the process of turning away from sin and ceasing to pursue happiness in the wrong place. And St. Thomas sees this as belonging to the first of the Beatitudes, the first three Beatitudes. And the next two he regards as relating to the life of active virtue, and the final two Beatitudes he sees as relating to the life of grace, the life of prayer. And the next three talks, this talk and the next two, will be according to that schema. And I'm going to do more on that in the third talk. But meanwhile, I want to focus on the Beatitudes as being directed towards our conversion, as capable, that is, of being, in general, used as an examination of conscience, a tool of self-knowledge and a preparation for the sacrament of confession. We'll have an opportunity for confession this evening. Sometimes a person who uses the sacraments regularly will feel they're not going forward. There can be all sorts of reasons for that, but one thing that may contribute to the feeling is the sense of always confessing the same things. Of course, this is natural. We go on being much the same kind of people, and God allows us to be weak in certain ways so that we do not become proud. At the same time, a good book on the subject I once read made the sapient remark, if your confession is general, the advice the priest gives you will be general. You may have an uncomfortable feeling that somehow you're not going forward, or that fixed patterns of behaviour remain stubbornly fixed and do not move, however often you confess them. And sometimes it makes sense to revisit one's list, a list of sins, to reconsider what should be on it. I have nothing against having a list, but sometimes it needs a rejigging. I remember once thinking towards the end of a confession that what I was seeing as a smallish sin floated into my mind, and I thought, that's a venial sin, I won't bother. But the next time I went to confession, I had examined my conscience a bit more deeply, and just that little thread unravelled a whole pattern of behaviours in my life that I hadn't been paying much attention to. And that pattern of behaviours was getting in the way of my spiritual life. So in the task of re-evaluation, a new exam of conscience can be a great help. Before we begin on this, I want to say an examination of conscience is a tool with two edges, and you have to be careful. So you have to go on recognising, as you consider what follows, that the purpose is to learn the deepest truth about yourself. And the deepest truth about yourself is that you are a beloved child of God. And the purpose of going to confession is so as to be healed and strengthened in love and service. So an examination of conscience is not intended to cast you into a state of despair over your state, but as a means of conversion. Confession is the sacrament of freedom, of liberation. We sometimes make the error of thinking we have to be holy in order to use it. I have to be already completely free from sin, completely free from any desire to sin again, before I can go to confession. And it's here in particular that the church should be seen as what Pope Francis calls a field hospital. for the wounded, and not a place of safety for the well. A regular habit of confession, if seriously undertaken, will promote and strengthen us in those good qualities we long to have, and which so often evade our merely human efforts. So what I will now say is not intended to make you feel bad, but to encourage you in truer self-knowledge. Some of it will be obvious and standard, but you may hear something that had not occurred to you before, or be shown a way to see the truth about sin in a new light. Most of the thinking today comes from the great saints, St. Thomas and St. Augustine. And one of the functions of the saints is to help us to see and understand the light of grace. So what you have in your hand is now a photocopy of the things I'm about to say. I'm going to about face, because I'm a sinner too. We all need to examine our consciences, me most particularly. But it's what you have on the sheets. I will start at the top. And I will be reading to you what's written here and making pauses for you to reflect. And then proceeding. And then at the end, I have a couple of short paragraphs that I'll stand up and say to you again. Okay? Blessed are the poor in spirit. St. Augustine, in his commentary on the Sermon on the Mount, says, "The poor in spirit are rightly understood here as meaning the humble and God-fearing. That is to say, those who have not the spirit which puffs up. Nor ought blessedness to begin at any other point whatever, if indeed it is to attain the highest wisdom. But the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." While St. Thomas relates this beatitude to the virtues of humility, reverence, fear of the Lord, and piety. So we might ask ourselves in relation to this beatitude, do I give God what belongs to him in terms of love and reverence? Do I pray daily and attend Mass on Sundays? Do I treat the name of God with reverence and respect? Do I work on Sundays unnecessarily? Am I proud? Do I relate truthfully to myself, to others, and to God? Do I wallow in self-pity or self-aggrandizement? Do I boast? Do I go in for self-harm of any kind, either physical or mental? Blessed are those who mourn. St. Augustine says, "Mourning is sorrow arising from the loss of things held dear. But those who are converted to God lose those things which they were accustomed to embrace as dear in this world, For they do not rejoice in these things in which they formerly rejoiced. And until the love of eternal things be in them, they are wounded by some measure of grief. St. Thomas relates this beatitude to the virtue of moderation. So we can ask ourselves, do I cling onto unreal values or go in for excessive attachment to physical pleasures? Do I eat or drink too much or go in for excess in some other part of my life? Do I spend too much time on the internet or watching television? Do I indulge my sexual appetite in ways that attack my own dignity or the dignity of others? Do I see others as objects rather than subjects? People in their own right. Do I allow my work to take over my life to the neglect of my other duties towards my family and my friends and my own health? Blessed are the meek. St. Augustine says, "The meek are those who yield to acts of wickedness and do not resist evil, but overcome evil with good." While St. Thomas relates this beatitude to the virtues of fortitude and piety or reverence. I have already talked about reverence towards God, but there are other focuses for reverence under God. So in relation to this beatitude, we might ask ourselves, do I show respect to others as being made in the image of God? Do I respect the right of life and strive to uphold that right in our society? Am I bold in proclaiming the truth? And when I do I also do this with gentleness and respect? Do I quarrel and fight for earthly and temporal things that I do not need? Do I support and show reverence for my parents, even when they fail me? Do I obey the law, pay my taxes, and honour my debts as far as I am able? Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. These, St. Augustine says, are lovers of a true and indestructible good, who will therefore be filled with that food of which the Lord himself says, "My meat is to do the will of my Father, which is righteousness." St. Thomas relates this and the following beatitude to the virtues of the active life, which he says consists chiefly in our relations with our neighbour, either by way of duty or by way of spontaneous generosity. The virtues he links to this beatitude are justice and fortitude. So we may ask ourselves, do I act justly in relation to God, my neighbour, and my family? Do I do my duty in work, honestly performing the tasks I am paid to do, not deliberately wasting time that I am paid for? Do I stand up for what is right? Do I show love to those to whom I owe it? My family, my community, my neighbour? Do I respect marriage and live so as to promote and cherish the bonds of family life? Blessed are the merciful. Blessed, that is, are those who relieve the miserable, according to St. Augustine. St. Thomas interprets this beatitude, interestingly, as a sort of extension of justice, rather than a contradiction. With regard to spontaneous favours, we are perfected by a virtue, so that we give where reason dictates we should give, that is, to our friends or others united to us, which pertains to the virtue of liberality. And by a gift, that is a gift of the Holy Spirit, so that through reverence for God, we consider only the needs of those on whom we bestow our gratuitous bounty. So we may ask ourselves, am I merciful? Do I forgive or do I exact revenge? Do I bear grudges? Do I apologize when I have done wrong? And do I accept apologies generously when they are given? Do I try to relieve misery and suffering in the world? When I do promote justice, do I tie up heavy burdens for others without trying to help them? Do my words build up or tear down? Blessed are the peacemakers. According to St. Augustine, the peace that is chiefly intended here is of those who bring their mind and reason into perfect subjection to God, bringing in order all the motions of their soul and subjecting them to reason by having their carnal lusts thoroughly subdued. St. Thomas says about this beatitude that to make peace, either in oneself or among others, shows a man to be a follower of God, who is the God of unity and peace. And he relates this beatitude to the virtue of justice and the gift of wisdom. So we may ask ourselves, do I seek first of all to be at peace in my soul? Or do I allow bitterness, greed, pride and resentment to disturb my peace? Do I set God's will above my own? Do I consider the claims of God in making decisions in my life? Do I seek to promote peace in my family and community or in my place of work? Do I pray for peace in the world? Do I promote peace so far as this lies in my power? Blessed are they who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Augustine says, apropos of this beatitude, that anyone who is seeking after the delights of this world and the riches of temporal things under the Christian name, consider that our blessedness is within, as it is said of the soul of the church by the mouth of the prophet. All the beauty of the king's daughter is within, for outwardly revilings and persecutions and disparagements are promised. And yet from these things there is a great reward in heaven, which is felt in the heart of those that endure, those who can now say, we glory in tribulations, knowing that tribulation works patience, and patience experience, and experience hope. And hope makes not ashamed, because the love of God is shed abroad in our hearts by the Holy Ghost, which is given unto us. Aquinas says of this beatitude that it is a confirmation of all the beatitudes, and that the kingdom of heaven is promised to the poor in spirit as regards the glory of the soul, but to those who suffer persecution in their bodies, it is promised as regards the glory of the body. So do I seek the glory of this world and the temporal riches rather than the kingdom of heaven? Does my lifestyle proclaim that I belong to Christ? Am I prepared to suffer the loss of reputation, advancement, or promotion for Christian values. Do I uphold Christian values in my voting, in my political decisions? If people at work or my family speak ill of Christ or his church, do I respond by upholding the truth? Do I accept calmly and meekly the disadvantages that come my way because of my faith, be it casual insult or outright discrimination? Do I stand up for the rights of those persecuted in a more open way? Do I stand up for the rights of or visit the refugees, looking out for my Christian brothers and sisters who suffer persecution even in the places they have fled to in order to escape persecution? I say the prayer that I was taught to say at the end of confession. If you know it, you can join me. O my God, because thou art so good, I am very sorry that I have sinned against thee, and by the help of thy grace, I will not sin again. It's very common in British circles to mock at something called Catholic guilt. Have you heard of that? Yeah, I don't know if it's spread as far as Finland. But in case it has, I will conclude this talk by referring you to another passage of St. Thomas's Summa altogether, where he explores the question whether penance is a virtue. He answers that after the general definition of repentance has been set up, that is, to deplore something one has done, the word penance may be taken in two ways. Firstly, as a passion, a feeling of the sensitive appetite. And in this sense, penance is not a virtue, but a passion, a feeling. But secondly, penance denotes an act of the will, and in this way it implies choice. And if this be right, it must of necessity be an act of virtue. For virtue is a disposition, a habit, of choosing according to right reason. Now it belongs to right reason that one should grieve for a proper object of grief, as one ought to grieve, and for an end for which one ought to grieve. And this is observed in the penance of which we are speaking now, since the penitent takes on a moderated grief for his past sins, with the intention of removing them. Hence it is evident that the penance of which we are speaking now is either a virtue or an act of virtue. That is to say, you're not supposed to wallow in grief over your past, but you're supposed to appraise it sensibly and to take the right action, which right now is to determine to make a good confession at the earliest opportunity, presenting to your Lord who loves you the things you have done and left undone, He may cast all your sins behind his back. In the name of God.